Hello everyone, Dave here. Before I start today's video, I just want to take a quick moment just to once again try to spread some awareness of the novel The Shard by Ted Cross. The author reached out to me and is trying to get this novel, just, if anything else, or if nothing else, just trying to get some awareness spread of it, to try to get knowledge of that this exists into the hands of people who might actually enjoy reading it. So I did a video kind of discussing it last week, but the fact of the matter is that when it comes to those recommendation videos, it can be difficult to get a lot of views on those because it's not on a familiar subject. And the fact of the matter is that if it's not on a familiar subject, or if it sort of goes a little bit outside of the norm for my channel, they don't tend to get the views that I would necessarily like. Some do, some don't. Sometimes it just takes a while. But, so this is, again, just a fantasy novel. The author also wrote a more science fiction or science-based story called The Immortality Game. And that one was done with a larger publisher that was able to get it into bookstores. In fact, Chapters, the Canadian bookstore that I typically deal with, actually has The Immortality Game available. You can go onto their website and you can order copies of it. But this one here is a smaller publisher, and it's a fantasy story, which is, I guess, sort of on the outs as far as popularity goes amongst big chain bookstores. So again, just take a quick moment if you haven't heard of this before, if you like, fantasy stories. There's one reviewer who wrote a review of it on the page that you can order them off of, said that this was, this writing style, or the style of story, was sort of an homage to Tolkien, which I consider to be kind of a high praise. Now, this isn't the kind of thing that I'm going to do often, or probably maybe even never again, but I really do believe that this needs to be more successful, and I want to do everything in my power to try to get, people purchasing and reading this story. So check out the link below in the description, and if it's not to your liking, that's totally understandable, but if you know somebody who might be interested in the story, then let them know, and share the link with them, and we'll do whatever we can as a community to try to get this novel, just raise the awareness and spread the awareness of it. Anyway, thank you guys very much again. Like I said, I don't plan on making a habit of this, but this is something that I do believe in and something I want to see succeed. So anyway, without further ado, let's get to today's video. Hello YouTube, Dave here again. A few weeks ago I did a video on the subject of print-on-demand items and their potential impact on the collecting community. And I enjoyed making that video, and I had a lot of really good, interesting feedback on it. One of which was actually a question that somebody posed, and the question was, if I think that having a reprint available of the D&D Rulecyclopedia now, and having it much more readily available than, ordering it through things such as eBay at exorbitant prices, if I think that this is going to have a negative impact on the OSR community. OSR standing for Old School Revival, which takes older versions of role-playing games and sort of updates them for a more modern style of play, while still trying to maintain the heart or the feel of the original games. The OSR game that I have that I can talk about is the Basic Fantasy role-playing game. So the question, again, was a really, really great question. Now, I'm going to be honest, I'm not really involved very heavily in the OSR community. It's something that I'm really, really sort of on the fringe of, and until I picked this up, I never actually owned anything that could be considered an OSR style product. So I'm not the most qualified to answer this, and I don't want my response to be considered the definitive source on the question. Not that I think I should be considered the definitive source for anything, but again, at the very least, what I can do is get the conversation going and see if people that are more actively involved, if they can actually kind of shed some light on what their experiences are, and if they've seen any sort of shift away from OSR games with the release of the D&D Rulecyclopedia through print on demand. So, in my opinion, just to get right to the answer, I think it's going to be, marginal impact, but overall, I don't think it's going to be like the death nail in the OSR community, which, from my understanding, is very, very strong and thriving. I think what's going to happen with people that want to get the Rule Cyclopedia, there's going to be a fair percentage of that number that simply want to have it to say that they have it, and will put it on their shelf, will read through it, but may not necessarily run games or campaigns. And if they do, it might be like a one-shot or sort of a short campaign, and then they go on to something else. When it comes to things like Basic Fantasy, for example, which is the only OSR game that I own, so this is the only one I feel comfortable even remotely discussing, I think that for the most part, individuals looking to purchase these products are more inclined to actually run them. So, like, for example, most people that I know that own Basic Fantasy or who recommended Basic Fantasy to me have stated very clearly that they run it quite frequently, and that's one of their kind of go-to systems. Now, for me personally, I picked this up for the purpose of doing sort of a comparison, which I just need sort of more time to be able to sit down and just thoroughly read both of these books, but having, you know, 2 kids at home can make it a little bit difficult. Anyway, but again, you know, for the vast majority, I think anyone who's purchasing OSR games is purchasing them because they want to run them. And again, the OSR community is a very, very strong one. So I don't think that the Rule Cyclopedia is going to put a significant dent into that. And honestly, if someone were to come up to me and ask me which of the 2 I would recommend that they start with or that they go to if they want to play an old school style game, my answer would, I guess, sort of vary, because if they're newer players who are just sort of getting into Dungeons & Dragons with, say, 5th edition or at the tail end of 4th edition, or maybe even, you know, starting around 3rd edition, I might recommend Basic Fantasy overall, because Basic Fantasy has a perfect blend of the old school system with the varying amounts of experience points for character progression, limited hit dice, like no hit dice after 9th level, the saving throw types. There's a lot of great stuff that's in this. Armor class system, which was changed and updated, but what's great about this is that it uses the D20 system, so that you know that basic idea of rolling a 20-sided dice and adding a modifier trying to equal or exceed a target number is really ingrained in those players. So something like this will be a much easier transition for them. I mean, honestly, if you're new, then I would say, you know, yeah, if you want to experience sort of an old school style of Dungeons & Dragons, pick this up, especially considering the cost, which is the other thing. Now, the Rule Cyclopedia is significantly cheaper now than it was through eBay listings, where it was in the hundreds of dollars. I mean, this one I paid $40 Canadian for. So, but for that $40 Canadian, I could buy a collection of books for Basic Fantasy in particular, because this system is printed and sold at cost. So it's a like not-for-profit sort of product, which is, again, really sort of an interesting and novel concept, and something that not all OSR games are going to be like that. There are some developers who that's sort of part of their income, and they kind of rely on profits from their games, and that's not a bad thing. Like, I wouldn't never say that you should choose this over something else just because the something else is actually contributing towards, you know, the income of the creator. It's just in my situation and in some people's situation, this is, you know, an easier thing to just kind of pick up and buy. And at the very least, this could be a gateway into other OSR games. So, for example, you pick this up, you start playing it, and then you hear somebody recommend another game. So then you know, pick that up or you try it out. And I think that's something that's still going to happen. Now, that's not to say that the Rule Cyclopedia won't have any impact. I'm sure that there are people out there who have picked up things like Basic Fantasy simply because they couldn't afford to get a copy of the Rule Cyclopedia, and I can understand that. And again, it was something that I never thought I would own it until the print-on-demand version came out, because there was no way that I was spending hundreds of dollars for a single book. That just wasn't going to happen no matter what. Just absolutely no way. So there may have been a small number of individuals who, when the Rule Cyclopedia came out, just said, oh, finally, and sort of stopped what they were doing with the other games and then picked that up. But I think that's really the exception and not the rule sort of thing. So in my opinion, no, I don't think that the Rule Cyclopedia is going to have much of a negative impact, and there is a chance that it might actually help boost, other OSR games. For example, someone picking up the Rule Cyclopedia, going through it and starting to, read through it or even try to run it, and if they're newer and they're not used to the older style of D&D with like the descending armor classes, THAC0 and things like that, it may prove to be just a little bit more than they want in terms of trying to figure out new rules. So they pick up the Rule Cyclopedia and it's just like, but someone tells them, hey, there is this alternative out there that plays very, very similarly, but it uses the, more modern mechanics. And I think that, that's something that has the potential to happen as well. In fact, I kind of feel like the two would almost cancel each other out. Like the amount of people who would drop the OSR games in favor of getting the Rule Cyclopedia might be equaled, or maybe even potentially just slightly less or slightly more, than the people who would get the Rule Cyclopedia and then decide that they want something that's more in tune with the rule sets that they are already familiar with. And again, if you want to get newer players into older style of D&D, then this is a much easier system to sort of get them into and get them to understand than the Rule Cyclopedia, which is different enough that it's going to be potentially a sort of rough transition between the two. So anyway, that's just my opinion, and again, I'm not heavily involved in the OSR community. The only OSR product that I have, again, that old school revival, is Basic Fantasy. I know that there were other games out there. I think Castles and Crusades was one of them, and I think someone said there was, I can't remember if it was called Dark Dungeon, or something along those lines. I can't remember. There's a whole bunch that were sort of thrown at me after I picked up Basic Fantasy. But again, that's just sort of my opinion now. I wish I knew more about these old school revival type games, and I am looking to get more more involved and just sort of learning them at the very least. But from where I stand and sort of my thoughts and my opinions on it, I don't think it's going to have that much of an impact. It could be a wash, it could be minor one way or the other, but I don't think we're going to see stuff like Basic Fantasy get abandoned in droves because people can now get the actual D&D Rule Cyclopedia. But let me know in the comments below what you guys think of this subject, especially if you are more familiar with some of these old school revival games. If you've played a bunch of them, and if you've seen from your experience in the last few months, if there's been sort of a change in attitude towards them, or if you've seen more people wanting to play the Rule Cyclopedia, or how things are going. So if you have insights on this, please let me know. If you have your own YouTube channel, please make a video response, and let's just try to get this conversation going and try to get as many people into it as possible, because that's sort of how you build a community. Just, get a bunch of people talking about stuff, as long as we can obviously try to keep it as respectful as possible, because when it comes to any of these types of games, it doesn't really matter, what game it is. There's going to be people out there that are going to love it. There's going to be people out there that aren't interested in it, but the fact of the matter is that, don't try to push your ideas onto someone else. Let's just be willing to accept everybody's thoughts and opinions on the matter. Anyway, that little PSA aside, again, let me know in the comments below if you have any experience with this, if you've seen any changes, and thank you guys very much for watching once again. Hope you enjoyed the video, and we will see you next time. Take care.